I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Ron Johnson voiced his support for using the Congressional Review Act on the asylum rule. Noting a surge in border crossings, the Wisconsin Republican claimed, quote, "Our legal system is horribly broken." Johnson then blamed the Biden administration's policies on that spike. Immigration policy has been a hot-button issue as Democrats and Republicans continue to clash over Title 42, a Trump-era border policy. Let's listen in for more.
Mr. President, let me first also express my condolences and associate myself with the comments from the senator from Texas. The tragedy is horrific. It's hard to think of anything more awful than what happened in Texas and in other schools over the last few years. But, Mr. President, I come today to the floor for another reason, in support of using the Congressional Review Act to disapprove of and prevent the implementation of a rule titled Procedures for Credible Fear Screening and Consideration of Asylum, Withholding of Removal, and CAT protection claims by asylum officers. I'll refer to this rule as the asylum rule to make it a little bit simpler. As the title suggests, there's an awful lot to this. But the reason we ought to disapprove of it is actually quite simple. This rule will go into effect the end of this month on May 31st. And on May 31st, what this new rule will do is it'll allow USCIS asylum officers to begin granting asylum without review by an Article III immigration court. Now, it's important to note that Section 240 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which governs removal proceedings, states, quote, "An immigration judge shall conduct proceedings for deciding the inadmissibility or deportability of an alien." Now, an immigration court is an Article III court. It's a separate branch of government from a USCIS officer, which is within the Department of Homeland Security and the executive branch. It's a check and balance on executive action. And it's a very necessary check and balance on an executive that is not faithfully executing the laws, as we have today with President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas. On May 1st of this year, news reporter Bret Baier asked Secretary Mayorkas in an interview, "Is it the objective of the Biden administration to sharply reduce the total number of illegal immigrants coming across the southern border?" Now, the obvious answer to Bret Baier's question is that is the goal, to reduce the flow of people coming to this country illegally. That ought to be every administration's goal. That's what a president and administration would do if they were faithfully executing the laws. But listen to Secretary Mayorkas' reply, his answer. Secretary Mayorkas stated, quote, "It is the objective of the Biden administration to make sure that we have safe, orderly, and legal pathways for individuals to be able to access our legal system." I first must note that our legal system is horribly broken. It is that legal system that has produced this result. Now, I don't expect the viewers to be able to look at and be able to see everything on this chart. But you can go to my website and you can download this and you will see the cause and effect of various directives, various rules, various regulations, various court orders and proceedings to cause this explosion, this out-of-control flow of illegal immigration. By the way, it all started back in 2009 when then ICE Director Morton issued a directive directly contravening the plain language of the law that required detaining individuals whose asylum claim was being adjudicated. So we stopped detaining him. Then, of course, in June 2012, President Obama, through his DHS secretary, created the DACA Memorandum, which was an open invitation to unaccompanied children to come to this country because they knew that once they got here, they'd be able to stay. Now, if you take a look at the history here, the gold represents single adults coming to this country illegally and being apprehended. This is on a monthly basis. Blue is family units exploiting our very broken asylum system where the credible fear standard gives you a free pass into the country. Red represents unaccompanied children. It's important to note back in 2014 when President Obama declared it a humanitarian crisis, about 2,000 people were being apprehended at the border on a daily basis. 2,000. Now again, because of different policy choices, the word gets out, different court decisions, and people in Central America and throughout the world realize that we are not following our asylum laws. We have a virtually open border. We're engaging in catch and release. So President Trump had to deal with a surge in 2019 that averaged more than 4,000 people per day in a given month. You can see that surge here. But President Trump took action. He engaged, he implemented the Return to Mexico policy. He made agreements with the Central American countries in Mexico. And we pretty well stopped the flow of unaccompanied children family units. We actually reduced the flow of single adults exploiting our broken immigration system. But then during the presidential debates, Democrat candidates, including President Biden, declared to the world that they weren't going to deport people. They're going to offer people coming to this country illegally free health care. And you can see, even during 2020, as we were building the walls, we had Return to Mexico policy in place, single adults realized there might be a change in policy and they started flooding our border. If you'll notice, we went from, on average, over about 10 years, about 30,000 single adults per month coming in this country. To the last 2 months, it's been over 150,000, closer to 160, 170,000 single adults. Throw on top of that, almost the minute that President Biden came into office and dismantled those successful programs, we then had a new flood, a new surge of family units in blue and unaccompanied children flooding our borders, exploiting our asylum laws. This new rule that's about to take effect at the end of this month, the asylum rule, again, circumvents, is contrary to stated law that says immigration judges, immigration courts need to make that asylum determination, not members of the administration, not USCIS officers. What this rule does is it gives that power to grant asylum, an awesome power that Congress never meant to give to the administration. It gives that power to USCIS officers and only allows a judge to take a look at that if the asylum claim is denied by the USCIS officer. So this isn't going to do anything to reduce the backlog. What this will do is this will increase the flow. This is another signal throughout the world that we have an open border policy. The only restraint right now is Title 42, and this administration is working actively to overturn a court order that said you must keep Title 42 restrictions in place. And if the USCIS officer isn't as generous as we fear they all will be and actually denies asylum, you're right back there in Article 3 courts. So the only purpose of this rule is to increase the flow, to accomplish Secretary Mayorkas' stated goal of making sure that we have a safe, orderly, and legal pathway for individuals to be able to access our legal system. In other words, this administration's policy on the border isn't to secure it, isn't to reduce the flow, it's to make the processing and dispersing of illegal immigrants more efficient, so more will come. Last year, 1.25 million people either encountered and dispersed or came in as known gotaways came to this country illegally and were dispersed. That's a number that is larger than the population of 8 states. That's how out of control this crisis is, and yet Secretary Mayorkas won't even call it a problem, much less a crisis. So it's obvious how harmful this rule is to our nation, to our national security. An open border is a national security threat. And so I urge my colleagues to join me in using the Congressional Review Act to disapprove of this rule and prevent its implementation. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.